we're all here. Good morning.
Well, we're sort of laughing hysterically. We've had, despite testing 2 days ago, but this has been quite an adventure getting a recording. We've tried so many platforms. I'm in Uzbekistan in a place called Khiva. Oh, full kitted out. Oh my God. Which is in the west. It's a fantastic place. It is beautiful weather, very hot. I'm glad to say Tajikistan will be quite a bit cooler.
Oh.
So much. I have a lot of warm kit with me, so I'm quite excited for that. As a British person, that's what I'm used to. So
that's great.
So my name is Sophie. I am from the UK originally, but I lived in Vietnam for 4 years. I was a teacher for 9 years, secondary school, and I moved to Vietnam in 2019 to be a school teacher there, and it was incredible. I learned a huge amount about Vietnam, and it has a very special place in my heart. And one of the things I've always been interested in is the security and empowerment of women and girls. Now, we're going to say very carefully now, firstly, trigger warnings, we are going to be discussing gender-based violence. The second thing to be aware of is that we're conscious that we often in these conversations, in these sort of short snippets, gender sounds very binary, and that's not the case. Gender is the full spectrum. We don't have the capacity to go into as much detail about that now as we would like. So we're just going to highlight that now. In Vietnam, I learned a huge amount about gender-based violence and how particular it is in different cultural and national contexts. I came from the UK where I thought I knew a lot, and I had to relearn a huge amount in Vietnam. And I met the most incredible colleagues, students, women in business, and particularly Hopebox, an organisation who support women escaping gender-based violence by empowering them and giving them a fresh start in life with sustainable skills and employability. And to honour that, I am running nearly 300 kilometres. The data is rough because it's such a remote part of the world. It is in Tajikistan in Central Asia, and we're running for 7 days, 300 kilometres from the border of Afghanistan the border of China, which I have been training for months. I've worked out, I've done on average 11 hours training a week. So I'm feeling very excited, quite nervous, and I'm really hoping that this run is going to draw attention to the prevalence of gender-based violence and how we all have a role in doing something about it. And it's not the norm. Gender inequality is not the norm at all. People who say that's how it is, well, that's like saying climate change is that's how it is. It's not. Gender inequality, like climate change, is a result of destructive human behaviour, which we all have a role in breaking. So thank you so much. I'm partnering up with Chickfly. It's done by Anna. She solved so many problems as somebody who loves being outdoors and outdoor clothing designed for women. It was designed for men, and that makes things more complicated. And I love the fact that she's designed clothes that are making a more inclusive landscape for me to participate in all the activities that I love so much.
We're so excited to be working with you, Sophie, and just like this run and this concept of making it about something bigger and how women really need access to public life, access to the outdoors, access to activities like this. I think it's really difficult for people to understand how a pair of pants can make that difference and why that ties in. And sometimes I have people and they're just like, you can just take your pants down. And I have to just explain very specific situations of why a woman might be limited in public life when they show their butt. And you've had multiple experiences, both your past in the military and this future experience where you're going to a country where there are modesty laws that we can't imagine here in the US or probably in England either. And so really great that you get it of just like how this all ties in together, and how when you limit somebody's freedom to participate in public life, it's a form of oppression that ties into that whole system. And I also want to introduce Sarah Walker. And Sarah is a minority partner in Chickfly. When I had this idea like 8 or 9 years ago, she invested early on. And she's also a school psychologist. So I was really excited to bring you two together because, Sophie, you've dealt with a lot of children's trauma in the schools, and that's Sarah's expertise.
Sophie, I want to hear more about how Chickfly pants have made it easier for you to do this run and sort of like what Anna mentioned that maybe previously women have done this run in a skirt and kind of how that would be different.
Yeah, I mean, a little bit on, I'm a history teacher, and the history of female clothes is fascinating because actually women are not supposed to wear trousers, and you can still today buy books that say women shouldn't wear trousers. And it's still banned because it's seen as an outrage of modesty of various forms. Now, the very concept of what you wear and how women are controlled and what they wear is a form of controlling their movement and what they do with themselves and how they participate in different parts of life. So wearing trousers is actually quite revolutionary. Even in the 1940s in England, it wasn't normal for women, and it only really became more of a thing in the sort of second half of the 20th century. And if you think for a minute about being able to ride a bicycle, drive a car, move quickly, women running marathons wasn't a thing. I think the first woman to run a registered marathon in recent history was the Boston Marathon, and the first woman to run it had to physically escape men trying to tear her off the course. Now, you can't marathon very well in a skirt, so it does restrict your movement. So at Chickfly, which is, I love comfortable clothes. Anybody who knows me, including those who I've worked with, I will know that I will have any excuse to wear comfortable clothes because I love the movement that comes with it. I really find that, uncomfortable clothing just really does restrict sort of what I can do. So Chickfly has there's an opening, so you can go to the bathroom far more easily than you could if you were wearing regular trousers and leggings, because you have that access. That means that if you're in a situation, let's say you're out camping or hiking, you don't have to worry about basically the admin, you have to worry about being at risk, you have to worry about taking off any enter clothes, which could very realistically put you in danger and make you also feel very uncomfortable. And I cannot emphasize enough how important that is, because so much of female empowerment for a lot of history and modern history has been about giving women access to traditionally male roles and jobs, and the military is a really good example. But those situations have not at all adapted to be more inclusive of women. And there's a few things to that. Firstly is that we associate that the traditionally male roles are the ones of high respect or the more professional. And so we don't necessarily give femininity that same level of respect that it should, or the same level of professionalism, or the same level of security. Sorry, trauma, someone tried to walk in. Yeah, so a pair of trousers should allow you to just be able to go to the bathroom far more easy, having to undress, offers you so much more security and takes away so much stress. Sorry, one moment. Sorry, later? Okay, thank you.
I see all your clothes laid out in the bed that you're packing.
Yeah, so at the moment I'm packing. There's a lot of very comfortable clothes in the back there as well. So you can probably see my lovely array of comfortable wear. Where I am now, you have to dress quite modestly. And again, comfortable clothes there is absolutely key. It's very hot. It's pushing 40 degrees. So I love being comfortable.
Wow.
Well, I want to ask more about your work with Hopebox. I don't know if we've introduced them yet, and your experience working in schools with trauma in Vietnam.
So one thing I'd say is that, particularly as a school teacher, as a teacher, you get a lot of safeguarding training, and it's the most important part of our work. And one thing I've been sort of very aware of is I thought I knew a lot when I started off teaching, and every year I realized I didn't actually know that much. Security for children and their safety is absolutely key. And when I moved to Vietnam, one of the reasons I chose to go to Vietnam was because it's somewhere I felt safe as a woman on my own moving around. And I suspected that kind of security, sort of me being able to walk around the evening, equated to sort of general better security for women overall. That was an assumption I made, which looking back, I now realize was quite naive. And I was quite shocked when I Vietnam, I could walk around. I would actually get less harassment than I faced probably in London. However, I sort of, through doing research, through talking to colleagues who were more experienced, I was like, actually, this is not, you shouldn't make these assumptions. It's not the reality. So Vietnam is third in the world for sex inequality at birth, after China and India, and it has a gender-based violence rate of 63%, which is nearly double the global average according to the UN statistics.
Wow.
And I really feel like education, which is the absolute key to sustainability in the future and women's empowerment, plays such a big role in that. It's something that I feel very strongly about. So I really wanted to sort of find an organization which could help me. And there are a few, but I really got to know Hopebox well, because Hopebox don't just deal with, it's a one-off interpersonal event. They recognize it as a full system at play here. And the biggest one is that women who are not financially independent, women who are often married off young, are highly more at risk. So they don't want to just, rescue somebody once. They want to break the entire system. And that is just the game changer. So they give women and girls skills, they give them training, and they give them the ability to be financially independent, which means that they can stay away. They don't have to go back to a position where anybody is at risk. I have a number of times asked them for advice. I've had them into my school. I've called up. I said, how do I respond to these situations? And they've always been on hand help. And I've learned so much from them, particularly in that it is, gender-based violence in Vietnam is very different to the UK. And I've learned a huge amount from them in that. They are not a big organization. They've only been going for a few years, and they feel an incredibly big task ahead of them. And they're doing a fantastic job. And I'm so grateful for everything I've learned from them coming in and seeing them talking to people as well. And it's really informed my discussions with colleagues, with young people, about how important this issue is, how urgent it is, and what we can all do.
It's funny because as an undergrad, I majored in international relations with a focus in women's international human rights. And that's kind of what I wanted to do originally. Well, not originally, but when I was an undergrad, and I ended up teaching and doing other things. But I worked with an organization that provided support to women with breast cancer. So it's kind of like this sort of like, I don't know, I wanted to work in Africa for an NGO and, support women's rights. So this is really cool because you're doing the work, and it's amazing and it's what needs to be done. So thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you. That's really good to hear. And I think what you say there about, something that we come to, but it is such a global issue as well. And I think you point out you've worked in organizations all over the world. And it's one thing, I think, saying everywhere you go, it's a bit different, but it is a global issue on a global scale. And that's what I think we always need to remember as well.
Yeah.
You were tying in women's equality with sustainability, and I found that really interesting. I was wondering if you wanted to talk to that a little bit.
Yeah, I'd say the first thing there, if you're interested in the book, I think I mentioned to you, Anna, already, is a book called Sex and World Peace by Valarie Hudson, which I'll put a link to, which I'd really recommend everybody read. And that book for me, I read a few years ago and was a real game changer, because basically what this book does, what the argument is that there is a link between the security of women and the security of states. And we see that states that have higher female participation, at the moment, the global average is about 25-26%. So it's only a quarter of our parliaments globally have, a quarter of them are female. The higher the rate of female participation in political leadership, the improvements in the environment, in social care, there's a far lower risk of war and conflict. And I found that fascinating. And it was interesting. And I was trying to sort of read about why this was. And this idea that basically states that have high participation of women in leadership are states that have lower levels of violence. And therefore, if you've got lower levels of violence at the ground level, that is reflected in the higher up leadership as well. And they're far more likely to push sustainable goals. And that I thought was such an interesting perspective. One of the examples is during the COVID pandemic, countries like Taiwan and New Zealand, which were sort of praised for having the best responses, were all led by women. And I thought that was a really interesting connection to make as well. Fundamentally, the improvement of rights of women benefits everybody. This is not a male versus female situation at all. More women in leadership, more sort of tackling systemic issues, you end up with things like men having better access to childcare. You have fathers who are able to access more custody for their children. So it's a benefit for everybody. And I think it's also a mark of some of my closest friends male. I have a very close men in my family, and a sign of actually respect that if we do see behavior that is not, we say and do something about it. We defeat that system, because we have more respect for the men that we know than to think some behaviors are okay. Lovely.
Such a huge issue, but that's great. I really want to read that book.
Yeah, it's an excellent book. I strongly recommend. I wanted to know into this, Sarah. How did you what got you behind Chickfly and a lot of these issues? Was it your work in human rights and particularly women's empowerment that brought you to be really investing in Chickfly?
Yeah, I mean, the whole idea that even in the United States, right? And you were talking about the history of clothing and women's rights. We've discovered that women weren't allowed to wear pants on the Senate floor until 1993. And it's like, what? So like, what? You know?
Yeah.
And I mean, even in my elementary school in the 80s, we weren't allowed to wear shorts. It was like during my 5th grade year and some heavy petitioning by the girls in my class that we were like, look, this isn't okay in the 80s. Like, we get to wear shorts too. This is not okay. But I mean, that, this is a recent situation. It's in something that is not over.
One of the things, women be able to enter the infantry, for example, in many countries is still very recent. The UK, it's only been in the last few years. And what that sort of does is it reinforces gender rights which do not benefit anybody.
I wanted to ask you both about, in dealing with gender-based violence in the schools, what has been one of your biggest challenges? Something you've come up against and had a really hard time getting through?
I would probably say is convincing people that it is a problem, which might sound strange, but it's there's been a lot of, and this is not actually just limited to gender-based violence issues. This is to issues to do with also race and class and age, that people might go, I agree with you, but we need to wait. Or like, oh, that's a nice idea. We'll put it on the list for later, which means never.
Yeah.
Or people just, and I think if you people assume if they haven't experienced something, it's often not real. That makes sense. Mm-hmm. One conversation I had years ago with a friend was I was really frustrated at some sexist comments I received. And I was saying, this isn't a one-off. This is going on all the time. And I was saying this to a friend of mine. He was male. He was a person of color. And he was like, yeah, that's so it's like, yeah, that happens to me as well. I was like, oh, what do you mean? I was like, I've never seen that. And he was like, you just did it. Okay, got you. Because he was like, yeah, he's like, I've experienced racism. And then you go, but I've never seen that. And he was like, and you dismiss it. And I was like, got you.
Yeah.
And I always remember that conversation, and it stuck with me. I was, I think, about 19 when I had that conversation. It stuck with me since. And it's that same thing of, well, I've never seen it. So.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that can be really hard in the schools when you have people trying to help, we have a team of people, right, trying to help a child. And it's like, there's nothing wrong with this child. This child is suffering from the effects of trauma, right? So we have a lot of children who have been in terrible situations, and you have a foster parent or something who's like, well, hasn't there been enough time? I've done everything. Like, why is the behavior like this still? And it's like, well, it's something that's going to resurface for this child. Like, this is, when children suffer violence of any kind, it's got a lasting impact, and we just need to, part of my job is in the schools is to help, support that. but it's also to say, okay, look, these are the ways that you can get help and actually deal with kind of the root, instead of just like, oh, Johnny needs to, sit in the corner or whatever. That's not the problem.
I think such a key thing is changing, rather than saying what's wrong with you, it's what happened to you.
Yes, exactly.
And
it's this
and I think for so many survivors of trauma, and particularly gender-based violence, that is what we need to remember, because it also shifts, because victim blaming is such a prevalent issue. Sarah and I have talked about this, and it just shifts that conversation in such an important way.
Exactly.
What happened to you? That's a
Mhm.
really good take home.
There is nothing wrong. And I say, well, like, that anybody who's trauma, there's nothing wrong with them.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with them. These are not interpersonal issues, these are systemic. It's what happened to you. I just want to sort of say again, sort of bring us all back. So I'm doing this run across Tajikistan. Every time I say it to somebody, they're going to go, what the hell? And I agree, it's crazy. But it's a hopebox. They're incredible. Please look at hopebox. They have a website. They are also on Instagram. They are absolutely fantastic. So please do look them up. And Chickfly as well. And I think together we're doing such an incredible job here. So thank you so much for everything.
Yes. And while Sophie is doing her run between the 19th and the 30th, we will be donating $1 for every pair of pants sold to Hopebox and continuing to promote them. And we hope you go visit their website and just educate yourself more about this issue, because something that Sophie said earlier was that acknowledgement within your community is so important, and that's really part of the healing. And so just knowing about it is caring.
Awareness.
Yeah.
Important.
So thank you for joining us today.
Thank
That's
you,
a caring
Sophie.
act. Okay, have a wonderful run, and we'll be talking again soon.
Yeah.
And have a good flight tomorrow. I'm so excited about your trip.
Thanks so much. Have a great day. Bye.
Okay, you too. Bye.
Oh, so nice to meet her.
I know.
Oh my gosh, amazing.
Here we go.